Well, good morning, everybody. This is the news that we are waking up to for Wednesday, February 5th, 2025, day 1078 of Russia's full scale invasion of Ukraine. And I'm going to start counting to the days since the American government has been subverted by foreign influence, because that is what Donald Trump is. Make no mistake. That is exactly what he is. And everyone who supports him is complicit in this subversion of the American federal system. All right. Last night, the overnight attacks. We saw 104 drones sent at the territory of Ukraine. About 40% of them were decoys. Again, they send the decoys in an effort to overwhelm air defense. But as I have suggested, we notice that the Air Force isn't shooting them down, right? They reported 57 attack drones shot down. They reported 42 lost on location due to active countermeasures. And what those countermeasures are, we don't know. Probably electronic warfare, maybe an evolution of the Dragonfire directed energy weapon or laser weapon that the UK delivered to Ukraine about a year ago now. And given the interview that we saw this weekend with the colonel who heads Ukraine's unmanned uh, forces, the drone forces, he says they've got a laser weapon capability. Interesting. Now, we don't know if that's a drone mounted laser. We don't know if that's a ground mounted laser. I mean, but I can't wait to find out. I'll tell you that right now. Ukraine, for its part, keeps hitting Russian oil depots. This oil depot is in This is the Al-Bashneft oil depot in Krasnodar Krai. And will this play for me? Let's see. Well, that's funny. Well, at any rate, you can see there's a large fire on the territory of the oil depot. Now, to the credit of the local governor, who said that only one tank is burning, from the video, it appears that he's right. However, he also said that tank contained a small amount of oil products. Dude, those flames are 200 feet in the air. I don't think it's a small amount, and I think there's every chance that it could spread to the tanks around it. But at this juncture, it does appear that there's only the one tank burning. Oh, there we go. Right, you can see the fire. You can see that column of smoke. You see the fire reflected in the tanks next to it. But it, to the benefit of the Russian authorities, it does appear that only one tank is burning at this time. Now, we've seen the sign-up bonuses for military conscripts go through the freaking roof. The record got hit back in November when in the St. Petersburg and Moscow area, they raised the sign-up bonus to 2.5 million rubles, or about $25,000, which is a lot of money to a Russian, right? That's like 2 years worth of salary. Boom. And there's a new record. According to independent Russian journalist Verstka, in the Samara Oblast, they are paying 4 million rubles. That's $40,000 at an average annual wage of $12,000 a year. You know, you're talking about 3.5 years worth of salary, boom, in one shot. Verstra is recording that across Russia, the sign-up bonuses have surged as recruitment has slowed. It's estimated that recruitment in Petersburg and Moscow has dropped from about 250 new recruits a day to less than 50. So about an 80% drop off. While 2.5 million rubles was the record breaker in November, it's now been eclipsed by the Samara Oblast's 4 million ruble contract bonus, or $40,000. Desperation for debtors in Russia who see this as a way to pay off all their debts in one shot and get ahead of the game is driving a lot of this. While a full mobilization could potentially tear Russian society, already stressed at the seams, apart. And so Putin is reluctant to go that route, and we don't see it coming. This new record bonus payment scheme has drawn Russians from all over the country. According to Verstka, the dormitories in Samara are full. The conscripts are all told that they are being sent to storm units, which means they're going directly from the conscription center to an assault force, to the front line. Now, it's my understanding, and this is from the Verstka report, that they're being given a choice. They can take a lesser sign-on bonus for not being sent straight to the meat grinder. But of course, when you're there for the money, the temptation is to take the money. Verstka said that according to one conscription officer, he enlisted 50 guys in one day. And of those 50, he is aware that only 2 are currently still living. It's just like the Russians buying North Korean lives from Kim Jong-un. The Russian state is simply buying the lives of the next generation of young men. And it's a sin. It's a crime and a shame. According to Verstka, the scheme is funded by the regional budget office, which has responsibility for certain recruitment numbers. They got to make these numbers. And they're putting in 3.6 million from the regional budget to every conscript, while the Russian Ministry of Defense is kicking in an additional 400,000 to bring it to the record 4 million, or $40,000 for the life of your son. Now, the attack in Izium, this is, we keep hearing, right, like the Russians have taken another town, another village, whatever. They're not taking towns. They're not taking villages. They're taking heaps of rubble, depopulated, dead things. And this is why. This was published in today's Kyiv Post. It's a shot of the city council before the Russians, and then after they'd hit the city council building twice. And this is what all of the east of the country looks like, at least along that 35-mile stretch on either side of the front lines. It's a wasteland. It's a nightmare. The attack on Izium yesterday didn't just destroy the city council building. It unalived, I'm sorry, I'm not on TikTok right now. 5 people were murdered, including an 18-year-old girl, and a pregnant woman and her fetus were lost. These are the enemies of the Russian state. This is what they spent $1.1 million on a cruise missile to accomplish. A 69-year-old man, civilian, was also killed in this atrocity. And they keep coming. Now, Zelensky went on with Piers Morgan, who I despise. He is a toady of the autocrats and the oligarchs. He is just the worst. And so, I guess that's who Zelensky wanted to talk to here, and he made some points. What were the points that he made? He said that he is ready for talks. Now, he mentioned 4 participant talks, and we don't know who the 4 participants would be. We do know that it looks like Putin and Trump are going for a Yalta 2.0, where the superpowers get together and carve up the world and just tell the peons what's going on, right? That's clearly what Putin and Trump seem to be angling for, although legitimately Putin more than Trump. Although we're hearing Trump's team now repeat some Russian talking points, which we'll talk about in 1 minute. Clearly, the Ukrainians should be one of the participants. As Zelensky said, any negotiations that take place without Ukraine are quote unquote dangerous. And I can't agree more. It's the sovereignty of Ukraine that's at stake. To exclude them from the talks is to mean that there will be no effective talks. How are you going to, right? I don't know. All right, well, give me 1 second here. Regarding Putin and dealing with Putin, sitting across the table from Putin, Zelensky was very clear. I will not be kind to him, quote. I consider him an enemy, quote. I think he considers me an enemy too. Fair enough. And I would agree. He absolutely does. Russian talking point. We'll come to that. Regarding territorial concessions, Zelensky said, regrettably, the support that is provided by our partners is insufficient to push Putin out of our territories, which is a strong indictment of the drip, drip, drip of Western support that appears to have been intended to simply keep Ukraine in the fight, but not let Ukraine win. And I can point to numerous examples, right? The slow pace of aid delivery, the 31 Abrams. We sent 31 Abrams. We have 1,700 in stock right now, just sitting in the desert, not deployed. So I'm very deeply sympathetic to Zelensky on this. Regarding territorial concessions, he also said that if that was the way that we could keep people from dying, then let it be. But it can't happen without security guarantees. And regarding security guarantees, Zelensky said a roadmap for Ukraine to join NATO remains Kyiv's fevered way to end fighting and get security guarantees. Now, by all accounts, Ukraine in NATO is a non-starter for Russia. So right off the bat, we have a problem, I think, in this thing. Now, the next big hurdle is this Russian talking point that Zelensky is illegitimate because there hasn't been an election. And Russia is pushing for elections. Kyiv is slamming this whole notion. Dmytro Litvin, President Zelensky's communications advisor, said, quote, Moscow keeps increasing missile and ammunition production, finding new ways to bypass sanctions and make money from oil. And it is clear that all these weapons are not being built to respect democratic neighbors. And that is the point. Russia doesn't want peace. Think concessions like letting Ukraine join NATO, it's never going to give that up. It's going to insist on its maximalist goals, and it's going to continue and expand this war as long as it can, because right now its economy is desperately dependent on the production of war material. That's where we're at. Now, for my part, this whole question of elections is critically important. And here's our boy Keith Kellogg, who's the chief U.S. diplomat responsible for the peace negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow. And according to him, which, by the way, the following statement is not true, right? The United States lives in a very privileged place. We don't have war on our territory because we're the United States. And so he says this thing that is not true, that most democratic nations have elections in time of war. I think it is important that they try to do so. What we're seeing increasingly from the Trump administration and the Trump camp is this notion that Ukraine has to have elections so that Zelensky or his successor can be the legitimate person that Putin will talk to. But Putin has made it clear he is not going to sit down across from a table with Zelensky. He has said his chief goal, one of his primary goals in this war, is to rid Ukraine of the Zelensky regime. That's a stated goal. He's not going to sit down with him. And he said that just that thing this week, calling Zelensky illegitimate and calling on Ukraine to have elections. The irony of that, of a guy who shredded his own constitution so he could stay in charge for 25 years, is, I mean, it's enough to make a cat laugh, really. Now, I think Mr. Kellogg's attitude is naive and serves no one but the Kremlin. And this is why. Because Ukraine has a constitution, and we're supposed to respect, the constitution is supposed to be the highest law of the land. And the constitution here very clearly prohibits elections at a time of martial law, which is what we are in. Then you've got millions of Ukrainians who are out of the country. How do you make sure their voices are equitably heard or their votes are not stolen? What about the millions that are currently in the temporarily occupied territory? How do we hear their voices? Will Russia let them vote? Russia says they're Russian. They're not going to let them vote. That's going to be a sticking point. And more importantly, trying to host elections right now in Ukraine simply opens Ukraine up to Russia's favorite game, election interference, which frankly they do so well, as we can see in the subversion of the government of the United States in the re-election of Donald Trump, Putin's greatest victory. But I think that victory did not come soon enough to save him. And for that, I'm grateful. So again, I think that Mr. Kellogg's opinions on this are naive. And we are seeing the Trump camp seduced by a Russian talking point that should be ignored. Mr. Kellogg also recently said that he will unveil the peace plan on February 14th, saying that they are very far along the way. I doubt that very much. Finally, Russians have denied a regular rotation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant of representatives of the International Atomic Energy Agency, including its head, Mr. Rossi. So the reality is that there are numerous nuclear power plants in this country. One of them is currently under Russian occupation in a state of cold shutdown. That does not mean it is safe. A failure of the fragile power grid that powers the water pumps that keep the reactor rods cool, or the backup generators that provide emergency power to emergency systems in the case of a power grid failure, were to fail, we could be looking at a devastating nuclear accident. Not to mention millions of, not in the case of Zaporizhzhia, but for the other power plants, millions of Ukrainians thrown into darkness, left without heat, at a time of the year where you can't have that for any protracted period of time. Taking a nuclear reactor that has just been emergency shut down and getting it started again is not like flipping a light switch, baby, right? You got to prime those pumps, and that takes time. Time that at 0 degrees Celsius, Ukrainian grandmothers in their homes without heat don't have. Okay, finally, and this is just, it's mind-boggling to me. The Russian psyche, the whole culture, seems to be like a bubble of grandiosity wrapped around a white hot coal of insecurity. Look at these two posts from social media. One has a victorious Russian army looking down on Big Ben because they've just conquered the United Kingdom, right? As if they can't even deal with Ukraine, right? You think they're going to get across the George Washington channel, right? I think Trump is talking about renaming the English channel the George Washington channel. Anyway, so the same country that produces this grandiosity nonsense also produces a young recruit who, likely drunk, drives his truck into an airplane, an Su-25 attack aircraft, destroying that fighter jet in his drunken madness. These are the competing. Here's the vision, and here's the Three Stooges reality. It's a stark contrast. And if the Russians didn't have 6,000 nuclear weapons, and if we weren't afraid of them, this war would have been over and there'd be a lot more Ukrainians still alive. I really believe that. It comes down to a fear of Putin's nuclear saber rattling. And it's a shame that we're so afraid. Because I don't believe these people are suicidal. They may be grandiose, but they literally believe the world is for them. So I don't see themselves taking themselves out of the world. They know our bombs work. Anyway, that's the news that we're waking up to for Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. I'm Peter Alexievich, coming to you live from Kyiv, and I'll see you tonight on the live at 5. Thanks, everybody.